Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And listeners like you who support us on Patreon or Substack, sign up for exclusive benefits at patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock or IHearOfSherlock.substack.com.
Well, you're gearing up for a big book tour.
Yes, August 26th, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing comes out, and then I'm on the road for a month.
Yep, for 11 states. You're going to 11 states. You're spending a whole month on the road.
I'm in quite a state myself.
Are you a good traveler? You can't possibly take a lot of luggage with you when you travel, do you?
Aside from the steamer trunks, no.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 317, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Now, here are your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder.
Oh, thank you as always, Mr. Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, I don't care what they say. You, sir,
Yes.
are the real thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. They tried to replace my natural sugar with corn syrup, but I said no.
That would have left you very saccharine.
Yes. No, we don't want any of that.
No, well, I'm glad to have the real Burt Wolder. Will the real Burt Wolder please stand up?
Remember that, to tell the truth? What an interesting show. 3 people would show up, and then they would all say, my name is Gahan Wilson. No, my name is Gahan Wilson. No, I'm Gahan Wilson. And then the panel would then try to decide. But boy, can you imagine doing a show like that today when somebody would take out their phone and say, no, it's you.
When Gan Wilson is dead?
Well, yes, they would say that too.
That would be great. It would be like a weekend at Bernie's.
It would be a 5.
Given Gan wilson's sense of humor, he would love that.
Well, maybe. I think he'd much prefer to be still around, but however, it would be like a 90-second, it'd be a TikTok game show. You can get Bud Collyer. Little known fact, of course, that the fellow who used to be the master of ceremonies, to tell the truth, Bud Collyer, was Superman in the 1940s on the radio program.
Was he really?
Oh, yeah. That was his thing where, Clark Kent sort of talked like this, but then, this looks like a job for Superman. He would change his voice when he became Superman.
Fantastic.
Well, have a good day.
Super, man.
Yep.
Well, we have really, as always, when we have this interview subject on, we have a great interview lined up for you today. It is with none other than Nicholas Meyer, the prolific and long-term Sherlockian pastiche author. His latest book is out, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing. It has to do with art and forgery. And it actually involves a really great discussion about the value of content whether it's written content or visual content, particularly with respect to our modern world and the advent of artificial intelligence. Just a fascinating discussion with Nick. And as always, he knows his Sherlock Holmes. So stay tuned for that momentarily. We also have a review of upcoming events in the second half of October, I think it is, of Sherlockian Society events. So you want to stay tuned for that. And Madeline Quinones is back with her Chance of Listening segment, where she looks at a Sherlockian podcast and gives you a little more information on it. And of course, the canonical couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to solve for which Sherlock Holmes story it is that we are talking about. And the winner of this episode's couplet will receive a copy of Nick Meyer's book, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing. So great incentives there to participate. And speaking of participation, we do have a couple of ways that you can do that as far as supporting the show. Perhaps you'd like to listen to ad-free versions of the show, or perhaps you'd like to benefit from additional bonus content. Whatever your drive is, we do have options available on Patreon and on Substack. We have, for as little as $1 a month over on Patreon, the ability for you to sign up there and listen to the show there and participate in the community. And over on Substack for as little as $5 a month. And you can subscribe annually too. You know, that'll bring down the cost by at least 10%. You'll have the option there. So check it out and see what works for you.
And what if I wanted to be a founding member?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. We do have the ability, if you'd like to become a founding member of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere on Substack, that costs $221 and gives you all of those benefits. Plus, we get to shout out your name as a way of thanking you. And in this case, Lisa Bevilacqua recently joined us as a founding member over on Substack. So, Lisa, thank you so much for your generosity there. I know it's lovely to see you every year at the Speckled Band Dinner and Friends of Irene Adler. And we encourage other people to join Lisa like that. But of course, Bert, it's not just on Substack. People can walk up to you and just hand you a check, right?
Well, that's right. You know, you can avoid, friends. You can avoid all of that, you know, typing and searching and putting in numbers and all of that irritating stuff. Just find me and give me a check made out to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere for $221, and you will become a founding member. And that means, of course, you get the key to the locker where we keep all the episodes and the jacket, and our thanks and a regular call out, not just on this show, but every night before we go to sleep, saying your name in deep gratitude. And today I'm happy to add Charles Blankstein to the list of our founding members. And when I told Charlie that there was such a thing as this founding member arrangement, he said he didn't realize the program had been lost. But we know better. And now, thanks to Lisa and Charles and Charlie, we are found. So there you are.
Well, the learned societies are in class again. It is now, we are up to the second half of October. We use Ron Fish's very handy and useful Sherlockian calendar, which you can find at sherlockiancalendar.com, as the guide to our discussions here. And you can find out more about any of these particular events by either emailing or clicking on the links of the contact person that Ron lists on the Sherlockian calendar. And if you have items that you'd like to add to the calendar, you just email Ron. His contact information is available right there on the site. So as we head into the second half of October, starting with the 17th, Bert.
Well, before we do that, don't you want to give a shout out to something in September?
You're absolutely right.
I thought you might. I mean,
Yes.
this is something that involves a friend of ours. This is absolutely fabulous. BBC. You've heard of them, BBC.
Yes.
They have a World Book Club. And on the 6th of September, friends, in just a few days, there's going to be a program on Radio 4, and it'll be rebroadcast a large number of times. And, of course, you can listen to this online, about the Hound of the Baskervilles. And it features Harriet Gilbert, who is the continuing host of the World Book Club, but she's joined by the crime writer Val McDermid and our friend Mark Jones, Dr. Mark Jones, who's a co-presenter of the Doings of Doyle podcast and editor of the Sherlock Holmes Journal. And they're going to be talking about the Hound of the Baskervilles and Holmes's influence on crime and detective fiction. And that was recorded during the Edinburgh Festival. So this is going to be a real treat, and we wanted you to know about it.
Yeah, that's a great call. We will have a link specifically to that program in the show notes, so you can check that out as well. So turning the page of the calendar to October, on the 17th of October in St. Charles, Missouri, or as the locals call it, Missouri, the Harpooners of the Sea Unicorn have a meeting. You can check them out at harpooners.wordpress.com, and Jonathan Basford is your contact there.
Yes, and then on the 18th, I've got to tell you that on the 18th in Providence, Rhode Island, my Sherlock Holmes Society, the Cornishars, are going to be having a luncheon. On the calendar, it says fall dinner meeting, but I'm going to be correcting that, and I'm the contact for that. And we are going to be gathering the Cornishars to salute the case of the engineer's thumb. And we have a very exciting Leon Sterndale invited speaker, and we're going to be at Fleming's Steakhouse. So if you're in the Providence, Rhode Island area on Saturday, October 18th, let me know. I'll give you an invite.
Wow. I didn't know Dr. Leon Sterndale was still inviting people.
He's accepting new patients. Yes,
That's very good.
He is. Yeah.
Well, also on the 18th, if you can't get anywhere and you do have a computer, there's a virtual meeting, a study group that the Norwegian Explorers is hosting. You find more information out at norwegianexplorers.org.
And it's such a popular day because in Nashville, Tennessee, also on October 18th, the Nashville Scholars of the Three-Pipe Problem are also having a luncheon meeting. Jeff Stewart is the contact there, and find out more at nashvillescholars.com.
Now we've got a threefer on the following day, October 19th. Let's go across the country, starting in the Northeast. In Keene, New Hampshire, the Monadnock Sherlockians are having a meeting. Our friend Anna Behrens is their contact. And then over in the Midwest, in Madison, Wisconsin, the notorious Canary Trainers are holding their meeting. You can find out more about them at the Comics Worth Reading website /Canary Trainers. And finally, out in Seattle, Washington, David Haugen is your contact with the Sound of the Baskervilles as they are hosting a meeting on that Sunday, October 19th.
And Monday, October 20th, Columbia, Maryland, our friend Matt Hall will be having a dinner meeting, an actual in-person dinner meeting of Watson's Tin Box of Ellicott City. And find out more from Matt or watsonstinbox.org.
All right. On October 21st, the Sherlock Holmes Society of Cape Fear is having a virtual meeting. You can find out more about that and sign up at SherlockHolmesSociety.com.
And the Afghan Perceivers on October 23, a virtual meeting. Brian Wilson is your contact for that at tulsa-sherlock.org.
All right. And then let's see, we're up to...
Yeah, two more on the 23rd.
23rd, yeah. Oh, my gosh, look at this. There's a backup of meetings. There's a 3-car pileup. The Handsome Wheels dinner meeting, Columbia, South Carolina. handsomewheels.com. And, maybe you could tell us more about this, Bert. The 5 Orange Pips. This is an invitation-only dinner on the 23rd.
Well, yes, and it's an invitation-only dinner, and we wish them well, and we'll not give you a contact for that because you can't go unless you're invited.
Yeah, if you don't know about it, you're not invited.
Yeah, if it's a mystery to you, then keep it that way, buddy. But the next day in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on the 24th of October, the fall dinner meeting of the Sons of the Copper Beeches. This is also invitation only, but Mary Alcaro is now doing a terrific job with leading and expanding the Sons of the Copper Beeches. So you can at least get yourself on perhaps a waiting list by pinging her a note. But it's the Sons of the Copper Beeches in Philadelphia on October 24th.
Excellent. On the 25th, that's a Saturday, in Skokie, Illinois, the Criterion Bar Association is holding a lunch meeting, and Franklin Saxena is your contact there.
And the bootmakers of Toronto are tightening their laces on a virtual meeting. On the 25th of October, Thelma Beam is your contact, or you can find out more at torontobootmakers.com.
And in Indianapolis, the illustrious clients are holding their dinner meeting on October 25th. You can find out more on their Facebook page, facebook.com/illustrious clients. You can also get yourself on their mailing list. And finally, there's been a date change with respect to the Amateur Mendicant Society. We are listed in the calendar as meeting on Saturday, October 25th. I had an executive committee meeting this week, and we planned it all out, and I came home and reported to my wife the wonderful news, and she informed me that we would be out of town that day. So the meeting of the Amateur Mendicant Society is being held the next day, Sunday, October 26th. It'll be a luncheon meeting at Rockies in Northville, Northville, Michigan. And you can find out more about us at amateurmendicantsociety.org.
There you go.
Phew. Well, that wraps it up for the second half of October for this Learned Society segment. If you would like to have your group mentioned, just get in touch with Ron at sherlockiancalendar.com. Our friends at MX Publishing are always coming out with new books, and of course we have talked your ear off all about the MX book of new Sherlock Holmes stories and its final volumes, but what we'd like to talk to you about now are 4 new books in 2025. There's Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Black Pharaoh by J.M. Reinbold. Sherlock Holmes Takes the Case, 8 Tales of Mystery and Intrigue by David McGregor. 221B on Her Majesty's Secret Service by Mark D. Ellis, and The Hidden Enquiries of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Hall. All 4 of these books are exciting adventures in the pastiche style, taking you through various locations and various time settings in the Sherlockian universe. Pick any one of them, pick all 4, it doesn't matter. You're going to have a good time as you read some of these new books that are available from MX Publishing. And just as a reminder, MX offers Audible books as well as paperback and hardbound, and ebooks. So pick your format and get these books in whichever you choose. All available at mxpublishing.com. Nicholas Meyer is an award-winning author, screenwriter, and director whose career spans over 5 decades across film, publishing, and television. He's best known for The 7% Solution, a groundbreaking 1974 Sherlock Holmes novel that spent 40 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It also went on to earn a British Gold Dagger from the British Crime Writers Association and an Oscar nomination for its film adaptation. Meyer's directing debut, Time After Time, led to acclaimed work on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, as well as Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and The Day After, a television film from 1983 that's the most watched TV movie in history. Screenwriting credits include Summersby, Fatal Attraction, and Prince of Egypt. Additional work includes a 2-part miniseries, Houdini, based on a biography written by his father. He's the co-creator of the Netflix series Medici, Masters of Florence. His other books include Target Practice, which was nominated for an Edgar Award, and an autobiographical novel, Confessions of a Homing Pigeon, published in 1981. His memoir, The View from the Bridge, Memories of Star Trek and a Life in Hollywood, was published in 2009. His 7th Sherlock Holmes novel, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing, was published in August by Mysterious Press. Born and raised in New York City, Meyer graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in theater and filmmaking. He received his BSI investiture of Fine Morocco Case in 2004. Nicholas Meyer, welcome back to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
You are one of our handful of multiple episode appearances. This is number 5 for you now. I think that enters you into some classification for, I don't know, probably a medal holder or whatnot. Bronze.
The man who came to dinner and wouldn't leave. Yes.
We'll still feed you. Don't worry. Well, we've already talked about how you got your start with Sherlock Holmes in previous episodes, so we don't want to retread that. But why don't we start with this, since it ties in directly to the topic of this particular novel, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing, is when did you first realize that you are a forger of sorts?
Well, I realized that when I, in early 1975 or late 1974, when my novel, The 7% Solution, was a best-selling novel. That's when there were such things, I guess, as best-selling novels. And my publisher sent me on a book tour, and I landed in Pittsburgh in a thunderstorm, and a reporter about my own age, which is to say pretty young, was sent to the airport to interview the best-selling author. And I think he felt this assignment was unworthy of him. And he demonstrated this with his opening question, which was, how does it feel to be a successful forger? That was his question. And I guess I had never quite thought of myself in those terms. So I was a little startled, and I said, well, it doesn't say by Nicholas Meyer. It says as edited by Nicholas Meyer. I thought that would get me off the hook. And I don't know what happened after that, but I do have a fairly vivid memory of trying to fall asleep in a strange hotel room in Pittsburgh and being sort of troubled by this accusation. I guess I thought everybody would understand that I was playing a game, and that I wasn't really, but somebody did ask me at one point, when did Sherlock Holmes die? So I realized that a lot of people, the answer incidentally is never, and I got interested in forgery as a result of this conversation. And I started reading about it and collecting books about it. And I actually, at one point, I was living in London, and the British Museum put on an exhibition called Fake, ? And it was 3 rooms, wasn't a huge exhibition, solely devoted to various kinds of forgery. And curious things like fish with fur, and I remember they had a fish with fur, and forgery turns out to be a very interesting topic because it poses a lot of questions. It poses ethical questions. It poses legal questions. It poses aesthetic questions. It poses cultural questions. What's the difference, for example, between a forgery and a copy? The answer is something you can't see, the intention. A copy labels itself a copy. I'm a copy. I'm for sale in a museum store. But a forgery attempts to deceive you into believing that whatever it is, whether it's a banknote or a work of art or I don't know, a piece of music, that it's the real thing, that it's authentic, and somehow to profit by that deception. And so it became a rabbit hole that I started wandering around in, forgeries versus copies. And there's also something called, in the French call it à la manière de, which is to say in the style of. It's not a literal imitation, but it's in the manner of, à la manière de. And what is that meant to do other than sort of circumvent? And what's the difference between a forgery and somebody who plagiarizes? Because they're closely related, but they're sort of opposites. For example, a forger tries to pretend that his work is real. I've copied a painting and I've made it so good that you'll think it's the real thing. A plagiarist tries to make you think that someone else's work is his. It's the exact opposite, but they're both forms of deception. So it's an interesting rabbit hole to start down because it goes to all kinds of crazy places. Let's say you have two paintings of the same smiling woman. One painting was made by Leonardo da Vinci and the other was made by me. And let's say, it's a hypothetical case, that you can't tell the difference. By no means, technological, no means can you tell the difference. Why is one more valuable, worth more than another? If you can't tell the difference, what is the difference? And the most interesting answer I ever heard to that is that one could not have existed without the other. It's almost a hypothetical answer. So forgery is, and I was collecting all this stuff for years, and when my publisher asked for another Sherlock Holmes story, I thought, well, since you've spent a lifetime fooling around with this stuff, maybe you can write a book about it. And that's what became Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing.
Well, that's great because, it follows your other books in that it taps into an area that you have a deep personal interest in and some unique knowledge and experience with, and one that you've thought about for a good deal. And far from being a forgery, you are using the world of Sherlock Holmes and the characters of Holmes and Watson and that milieu, to tell a new and very well plotted and very effective story. But in this case, what's happening here is that there are a series of blizzards in 1890s London and an artist goes missing. So we should tell our listeners a little bit, because what's going on here is that Holmes and Watson are sort of thrown into this big business of art, which conveniently neither one really seems to know much about it, except Holmes, of course, acknowledges his Vernet ancestry.
Yes.
So what about your knowledge of art? Are you yourself an art collector? That's what I was curious about when I started to read this.
Well, on a very small scale way. My girlfriend is a big art expert, and she is something of a collector, and she gives talks and teaches courses about art, and she cultivates emerging artists and goes to places where art is taught, where people learn to become artists, and teaches them something about the business of art. And art is a big business. It's in something of a slump at the moment, which is kind of interesting. But there are paintings and art is sometimes a way to move money. Sometimes it's a rather surprisingly complicated, not to say sordid, business. So yes, I've learned a lot from hanging out with her, and also I grew up in New York City, and New York City is a place that is lousy with museums and where you just, we don't have the Louvre, but we have the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we have the Museum of Modern Art, we have the Whitney, we have the Frick, which has just reopened after a complete renovation.
Great museum.
It's terrific. I haven't been to the reopened version of it, but I will get to it. And the Cloisters in New York, which is the uptown branch of the Metropolitan Museum, which is a whole medieval castle and series of monasteries that have been brought over piece by piece in the 1920s, I think, by the Rockefellers, and reassembled on the tip of Manhattan when I was a kid. It was like going back in time to medieval times and, wishing you could run around with a sword. So, yeah, I was exposed to a lot of this, and I respond to it. Do I know a lot about it? Only lately and recently, and from a lifetime of sort of looking at it without really giving it a great deal of thought, I guess. But learning a lot. Learning about stuff is fun. When you're writing a book and you need to learn about what you're writing about, at least in my case, it's like suddenly going back to school, and you bone up on a whole bunch of stuff that you sort of knew, or you were sort of interested in. Suddenly it's like you're in medical school. So, yeah, there was a lot of research involved in this, but also, to be fair, it was a lifetime of thinking about forgery ever since that silly conversation in Pittsburgh.
Now, I don't want to rip a Band-Aid off a long closed wound, but part of that era, you actually were involved in a bit of a legal spat with a Sherlockian scholar. What was that about?
I was sued. I was sued by a professor at Yale who claimed that I had plagiarized an article that he wrote about Sherlock Holmes, Sigmund Freud, and cocaine. And this was mortifying to me because this is the first successful thing I'd ever done in my life, was published a novel that became a bestseller, and now I was being accused of being a plagiarist. And it was more vexing because I had trouble to acknowledge his article in my acknowledgments at the back of the book. I said, I read this thing, among many other things that inspired the book. But I had to defend myself, and I learned something about plagiarism and about copyright. It turns out, fortunately for me, that you can't copyright an idea. You can only copyright the expression of an idea, which is to say the words. And I hadn't used any of this professor's words. I had just made up my own story, partially inspired by his idea. But he didn't write a novel. He didn't write I didn't use any of his words, but it was a little crash course in something or other.
Yeah, I can't help but be reminded of an iconic letter that Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain, sent to Helen Keller in 1903. I think she had been accused of plagiarism. And he, in part of it, he wrote, it takes 1,000 men to invent a telegraph or a steam engine or a phonograph or a telephone or any other important thing. And the last man gets the credit, and we forget the others. He added his little mite. That's all he did. These object lessons should teach us that 99 parts of all things that proceed from the intellect are plagiarisms, pure and simple. And the lesson ought to make us modest, but nothing can do that. Then why don't we unwittingly reproduce the phrasing of a story, as well as the story itself? It can hardly happen to the extent of 50 words, except in the case of a child. Its memory tablet is not lumbered with impressions, and the actual language can have graving room there and preserve the language a year or two. But a grown person's memory tablet is a palimpsest with hardly a bare space upon which to engrave a phrase. It must be a very rare thing that the whole page gets so sharply printed on a man's mind by a single reading that it'll stay long enough to turn up some other time or be mistaken by him or for his own. And he goes on and on. But the idea here is that we are building on ideas that have been around for a long time. And there's very originality in the world, except in how we actually put it together.
Well, it's the way I said it, maybe a little more briefly, is that all art is a history of cut and paste.
I like that.
The fact of the matter is that and by the way, Michael Chabon said all fiction is fan fiction. you build on what's gone before. The Odyssey is a fanboy sequel to the Iliad. The Aeneid is a fanboy sequel to the Odyssey.
Is it ever?
It's like the same characters, and just we want to see more of them. So somebody else comes along. And how many different versions of Carmen are there? There's Carmen Jones. There's a Russian Carmen that's all percussion. Everybody
Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet. Yeah. Interestingly enough, Romeo and Juliet, I think, comes from some Italian play that Shakespeare stumbled onto, as he did Hamlet. These are not his plots. These are his plays adding on, building on. And so it's very hard to, whatever is original, what came first. And we put a big premium on what comes first. But it's very hard sometimes to get to that place because you keep going back and back and back, and you'll find earlier versions of things that other people have added on to, cut and pasted. And it's unfortunate that in the world where we, I think, correctly feel that people should be able to monetize their creativity, that if you write a book, you should get paid for your book. If you write a piece of music, you should get paid for your piece of music. At the same time, it's very hard to start from scratch without some version of the cutting and the pasting.
Sure.
The problem, where all works of art, here's another miscellaneous thought, all works of art are inevitably, ineluctably products of the times in which they were created. Mozart doesn't just sound like Mozart. He sounds like late 18th century Middle European orchestral music. Renoir doesn't just sound like or sound. Renoir doesn't just look like Renoir. He looks like late 19th century French Impressionism. And by the way, this is all as it should be. I bet if I showed you 4 movies that were all set in 1776, and one of them was made in 1924, and one of them was made in 1972, and one of them was made in 2015, you'd be able to tell within 5 minutes and 5 years when each of those movies were made, because all the things that were there at the time they were made were influencing what they look like, whether it's the length of the woman's eyelashes or what sentiments were coming out of people's mouths, whether it was black and white or color, whatever. And where that really screws up life is for forgers, because a forgery is also the product of the time in which it was made.
Yeah.
And so years later, it'll jump out at you. This is not an original something. This is from the Van Meegeren, the famous forger of Vermeers, and his Vermeers were sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars in the 30s or the late 20s, and today they're terrible. You can they look like Art Deco, and you think, how could anybody have been fooled by this?
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting, because I think you in the novel here you indicate pretty clearly that a successful forgery operation typically is not done by a single person. There is a network of people involved. I mean, obviously the artist himself has to produce the work, but then you've got a gallery owner, and you've got someone who is inspecting the painting to see if it is an authenticator, and there have been instances where these individuals have been in cahoots.
There's no question that the art business is a very corrupt business. It may, in some cases, be accidentally corrupt. If somebody unknowingly sells something that is not genuine. But a lot of the times, and you read about this, you read about art gallery scandals all the time. And one of the biggest scandal art dealers was the biggest art dealer of all was a man named Joseph Devine, Duveen, and Joseph Devine specialized in old master paintings, Rembrandts and Rubens and Caravaggios and even a Da Vinci at one point. He sold these paintings, and understandably, somebody who's a rich person going to lay out a lot of money for a Caravaggio wants to know its history, and he had an authenticator, and his authenticator was a famous expert on Renaissance paintings, a man named Bernard Berenson. And Bernard Berenson, who was an American but who largely lived in Europe, and he lived in Florence. He had a villa which now I think belongs to Harvard University. I could be mistaken. Itatti, Ittatti, I think, or Ittatti, his villa where students go to study. And he was a big authority on Renaissance painting. But it also is true that he occasionally, and I don't know how occasionally, would authenticate paintings for Joseph Devine that either were not genuine or had been worked on, tarted up in Devine's workshop, and he would get a kickback for paintings that got sold to various people that were, let's put it, less than genuine. I'm sure there are two sides to this story, but there's a whole book I think it's called Artful Partners by a man named Colin Simpson, which is about the hidden partnership between Duveen and his authenticator, Bernard Berenson. There's a lot of that stuff that goes around, and there's a lot of here's a question. I mean, if you go to a museum, you admire a painting, you fall in love with it, and you're moved by it, or a statue, or for that matter, a piece of music or something, and then you find out that it wasn't painted by Da Vinci. It was painted by Joe Schmo. Does that somehow invalidate the effect that the picture had on you? How many paintings are hung in museums and houses around the world that people respond to, but we don't know that they may not be real? They may be fakes. They may be forgeries. And yet, put it another way, it now becomes possible to manufacture a diamond, something called zirconium. But you would have to be beyond an expert in some of these cases, beyond an expert, to tell that this didn't come, from a diamond mine, that this wasn't fished out of a river in South Africa or something. You couldn't tell. But if somebody, you admire this diamond and you go, Guy, what a diamond. Or somebody said to Maid West, goodness, what diamonds? And she said, goodness had nothing to do with it, honey. If you love the diamond and you believe it to be forged by nature as opposed to created by man, does that make it less beautiful? Does that make it obviously, in the real world, it makes it less valuable if that's determined. But if it's not determined, if you can't tell the difference, what is the difference? Forgery is very complicated.
Well, it's interesting, too, in your description of Berenson and art authentication, I noticed in Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing, we have a character who's an art authenticator. And when I thought about that character, one of the things you think about is that these people who do the work of authentication try to become or do become familiar with a language comprised of technique and visual clues. The
Yes.
scholarship is all about how does this guy paint hands? And what are the little details in this reflection? And tell me, let's look at that brush stroke and this particular shadow. And there was a fellow, I think, named Morelli, Giovanni Morelli, who put me in mind of your character. And then I thought about the fact that, there's a connection here to Sherlock Holmes, who's also looking at the shapes of ears and wear on people's knees. And then there's a connection to Freud, and which is very much up your street. And I was just curious, what your thinking was about where the inspiration for your Signor Garibelli came from, but also what your thinking is about detection and Holmes and about the larger psychological issues of all of this.
Well, this is all about not only this book, but about Freud, it's all about some form of detection, the art of clues, of deciphering clues, and not only and deciphering them is the opposite word, the correct word, because it's not only about seeing what it is. What is suggestive, as Holmes might say, it's suggestive, but ultimately managing to interpret what the clue could or does mean. And the moment you get into interpretation, you enter a very complicated area. People can misinterpret clues. There are Sherlock Holmes cases in which he comes to a conclusion based on all the the clues, the facts, and he's made up a theory that explains all these facts, and it turns out to be wrong. There's a different explanation that covers the same facts, the same clues. So it's murky, and experts are frequently wrong. Experts are often wrong. There's a book somewhere. Oh, I have it within arm's reach, and it's called "The Experts Speak: The Definitive Compendium of Authoritative Misinformation" by Christopher Cerf and Victor Navasky, and it's all about people who are wrong. And even though they come with a lot of letters after their name, and they're supposed to know what they're talking about, and either knowingly, or let's give them the benefit of the doubt, unknowingly, they make incredible mistakes. And as I say, when you first look at, a forgery that's contemporary, when people in the 20s or 30s looked at Van Meegeren's Vermeer forgeries, they looked pretty good. But, 40 years later, they look ridiculous. So experts are frequently wrong, and as I say, giving them a benefit of the doubt, accidentally wrong. But experts are not always so expert.
I have a question related to that. As we look at your series of books that you've edited about Sherlock Holmes, and we know you started back in the early to mid 1970s, and now we are in the mid 2020s. How do you think your work in these books specifically reflects the time? Do you think you were able to retain Watson's style throughout, or
this is fascinating?
Yeah.
Or at least fascinating to me, because the answer is, of course, my forgeries jump out now, or will jump out now, as forgeries. They retain glimpses of Doyle and glimpses of Watson and glimpses of Holmes, and sort of their imitations. But inevitably, the sensibility behind them is the sensibility of Nicholas Meyer in whatever late 20th or early 21st century he was writing. The concerns, the biases. I did the best I can. I could, but inevitably, as time, no one, I think, over the long haul, is going to confuse me with Arthur Conan Doyle. Having said that, they still may give the kind of pleasure that a zirconium diamond might give. As long as somebody didn't tell you it's a zirconium diamond, it may be okay.
Well, but you're being very self-deprecating a little bit here, Nick. I mean, the fact is that along with time moving on, audiences' expectations change. And what you've created in, particularly this last book, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing, you've given us some wonderful scenes, some places, some locations in the story that Conan Doyle never would have taken his readers to. He's not putting Holmes and Watson in the Portobello Road. He's not visiting an artist's studio. He's not going to the National Gallery. If he did so, it would be in such a condensed form like Nathan Garadeb's house. And if he gave us a painting, it wouldn't be Olympia by Edouard Manet, And he wouldn't have given us the Easter eggs. For the Sherlock Holmes fan, you've just given us a lot of lovely Easter eggs, like Charles I, which prompts Holmes at one point to mutter, "Whose was it?"
Yes, the Musgrave
and another
Ritual.
that I particularly loved, somewhere in here, you've got Holmes saying, "Watson, come here. I want you. which has got nothing to do with anything except Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone.
Correct. I couldn't resist.
Yeah, good, and it's just a lot of fun. So your work is tuned to the contemporary ear here.
I think what I've learned after a long time, and believe me, for me to learn anything, it does take a long time, is that Holmes has become my avatar. I can say what's on my mind through Holmes in my stories. I can, within the larger contours or limits of his character, allow him to express thoughts, feelings, ideas that are plausibly his, but more factually coming out of, my thinking and my feeling. I couldn't do this if what came out of his mouth in Doyle was so utterly foreign to me in terms of sentiments or intellect or whatever. But there's enough wiggle room in, as I see him in Holmes, for me to be able to express myself. I also think that Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing, which people say never, but I'm betting this is my last Holmes discovered manuscript. And I think that there was a reason why I wanted to go back to London. I've had him in Paris, I've had him in Russia, I've had him in, I don't know where I've had him, Egypt, in America. To go back to London to make a full circle with A Study in Scarlet, there was something of a, dare I say, sentimental journey involved in going full circle.
Well, that makes sense. And you cut me off at the pass, because my next question was, when can we expect the next one? But rather than ask you that, let me ask you this. What else is keeping you busy these days?
Well, I'm working on, this is a very strange time in the movie and television business, as I'm sure you know, between the strikes on the one hand and the pandemic on the other hand and AI on the other hand. As Tevye would say, I have no more hands. Everything being a lot of buffeting. So there are things that I'm working on. I can't really talk about television series at the moment is what I've been working on, a couple of them. And we'll see if anything happens. I don't want to get too specific for obvious reasons. But those are the things I'm working on. I think I sent you my article that I've sent to my agent about, called the Forger's Dilemmas, and maybe somebody will publish that, or somebody will publish it. But those are the things. I'm not idle, and I also spend a lot of time, unfortunately or fortunately, working as an editor on people's stuff. The problem is, what I've learned in the book publishing business is there are not a lot of real editors around in publishing houses anymore. Most of them are deal makers. They're deal makers. They're not editors. If you want an editor, you're going to have to pay an editor. And I discovered this in a very strange way. But I also discovered it for myself at one point on one of my books. And I wrote to my editor and I said, don't you think it might be better if this information were put someplace else and this chapter ended here? And I got back, oh, that's a very good idea. And I thought,
You should be in that.
Nobody there is giving any thought to this. The margins in the book business are so precariously thin, blah blah, that nobody has time to actually spend giving thought. And I'm not expecting someone to be Maxwell Perkins, who was a famous editor, for the benefit of your listeners. I just wanted somebody who was going to try to help me make my book as good as it could be, as opposed to signing the next author or whatever. And I realize everybody is hard-pressed for time, and all our attention spans keep growing shorter. Some years ago, Jeffrey Katzenberg came out with a thing, I thought it was called Quibi or Kibby or something, and it was all about short dramas that you would watch on your phone.
Yeah.
And it was a flop. But 10 years later, 15 years later, it's happening. People are watching these 2-minute verticals, they're called, on your phone. And I have friends who are acting in them. It's absolutely hilarious. But it does make the idea of sitting down with a book, that's an engaging proposition of a certain kind that we tell ourselves, oh, I don't have time, just give me the bottom line, sum it up, let AI reduce it to something, let AI write it. So yeah, it's a different furrow.
It is. It is. Well, we appreciate you furrowing with us.
Thank you.
And sharing, some of these very philosophical concepts behind the notion of forgery and plagiarism, themes that we see writ large in Sherlock Holmes and The Real Thing, which just dropped from Mysterious Press, of all places, our friend Otto Penzler. The book became available on August 26, 2025. So, folks, if you haven't already bought a copy, get out there to wherever you purchase books and get a copy of Nicholas Meyer's Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing.
If you don't like it, you get your money back.
Yeah.
Oh, and we should tell our listeners, too, that Nick is departing on a 30-day tour. He's going to be in 11 states, from the West Coast to the East Coast in the month of September. And you should be able, on the Mysterious Press website, to find out all the details of his book tour. He's in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, New Orleans, Minneapolis, Iowa City, Indianapolis, Bloomfield, West Bloomfield, Chicago, New York, and Boston, and even a couple more. So there you go.
You can find it on my website as well, which is nicholas-meyer.com. I have a real website.
Nicholas Meyer and the Real Thing. This is great. We will have links to all of those and more in the show notes. Nick.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for doing this. It's a pleasure as always.
Oh.
Talk to you soon, I hope.
Nick, I've got one more very quick question for you. Just something
Sure.
I was curious about. Have you ever painted?
It's a funny question. I have absolutely no talent, but in art school, in grade school, in art class, I was always doing enormous murals that were so big that I was out in the hall because they would unroll these, long pieces of paper, and I would do paintings of two knights charging each other, or I would do paintings of Ahab and Moby Dick, or I would do paintings of all the Greeks coming out of the belly of the wooden horse. None of this displayed any talent whatever, but a heck of a lot of ambition. Cinematic stuff.
Yeah, cinematic. See, you were doing storyboards.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah. Similar theme throughout.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
One word that I think describes the book to me is clever. It really is clever. I love the conversation we had with Nick because it shows you the great range of his interests and variety and how eloquent he is in some of these issues. But the book is so clever, first of all, because it's a great story. It's a terrific plot. And he was comparing his work to Conan Doyle. And this is a more, I think, elaborate and satisfying plot that Conan Doyle would have done in a similarly sized novel if he'd ever written anything of that size. But it's also, just so full of so many interesting things about art and about the chemistry of paint. Nick has Holmes at his chemistry table looking at colors and paint as they're put together and what happens to them. So there's just a lot of fun in it. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, and to me, as we look at this as a bookend of sorts, if it is in fact the last of his pastiches, I think it compares very favorably to the 7% Solution. And having read all of them, I think it would be my second favorite. The West End Horror, which was a follow-on to 7% Solution, well, that is kind of one of these fiction meets history kind of pieces where, we meet Oscar Wilde and we meet Bernard Shaw, and there's the celebrity sightings, as it were, of a time. And some of the other ones take us on the road to Egypt and Paris and Russia and whatnot. But this really has that same spirit of, chasing around London and Sherlock Holmes in his time and place. And, the degree to which there was a need for a little bit of knowledge of the art world, but more importantly of the world of forgery. We really get the technical side of Holmes that comes home to roost, and we see Watson with a romantic interest. And there, a lot of buttons that are pushed here that I think are familiar and just wonderful to see from those of us who enjoy the original stories. Well, Bert, she's back. Madeline Quinones is here again with another segment for us. In this case, I think you'll be even more interested than usual because Madeline has a very special show she's reviewing this time around. It's A Chance of Listening with your correspondent, Madeline Quinones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madeline Quinones, and today is going to be a bit weird because it is finally time for me to talk about my own show, Dynamics of a Podcast. Dynamics of a Podcast is the only podcast dedicated to Professor James Moriarty, Napoleon of Crime, and arch nemesis of Sherlock Holmes. I started this show back in the spring of 2021 with one of my best friends, Dixie Parkinson. Mind you, the show isn't about how we think Moriarty's so cool or he's just misunderstood. No, he's a terrible person and we know that. We just also think that he's interesting, both in the canon and in all the ways that he shows up in Sherlockiana. Dynamics is really about looking at Sherlockiana through a Moriarty lens. Or, put another way, it's a Sherlock Holmes podcast disguised as a Moriarty podcast. But the niche focus has allowed us to do some really neat interviews and have some fun conversations. We have a few different episode types, mostly because I am nothing if not chaotic. We do have interviews where we've talked with friends, writers, and actors, and those conversations have been amazing. We have topic discussions, more early on when we were still finding our feet. If we've even found them yet, jury's still out. We have live and local episodes where we've recorded panels we posted at 221BCon. And Ashley Polisek has been on every one of them so far, and they've been so much fun. We have adaptation discussions, where we'll talk about a particular adaptation, the adaptation's Holmes, and then the adaptation's Moriarty. This one in particular is an episode type that can keep us going for years. There are also recap episodes, where we'll talk about a Sherlockian event that's just occurred. In the early days, it was just me telling Dixie stuff, and that obviously didn't work well. So now we have a guest every time we do a recap, and it's so much better. Honestly, these things could almost be their own podcast. Kind of the trifles to our eye-hos, but we do usually manage to tie things back to Moriarty somewhere. And then there's the canon discussion episode. Yes, we've only done one so far, and we do plan to do more. But Madeline, you ask, why would you do canon discussion episodes when there are so many podcasts out there already doing just that? Well, for starters, ego, so write that down. But also, to everybody who thinks that Moriarty is in too many adaptations, I ask you, what if we worked him into every story in the canon? So yes, the real goal is to try to tie back every story to Moriarty or at least to Moran in some way, which was even the topic of our first con panel. So let's talk about highlights. Usually I'd recommend an episode for each type, but our one canon discussion episode is very long since it covers A Study in Scarlet, and our topic discussion episodes are maybe not our best foot forward, so I'll set those aside. Actually, if you're going to listen to one episode out of our whole show, please make it episode 21 on the holodeck with Daniel Davis. Because we actually got Daniel Davis on our show. You know, he's Moriarty on Star Trek and Niles the Butler on The Nanny, and it was amazing! Most of the conversation was about his past and recent appearances on Star Trek, but we did talk a little bit about The Nanny, and also about his role in The Hunt for Red October with Alec Baldwin and Sean Connery. That was the best episode ever, and we still can't believe we did that. I'd love to recommend other interviews, but in the interest of moving on, let's talk about adaptation discussions. Here, I've got to plug episode 14, Enola Holmes 2 reaction, which I still think is one of our best conversations that is just me and Dixie. And we did it entirely off the cuff, no notes or outline, because we had planned an entirely different episode and that fell through, so we had to pivot. But Enola 2 was brand new at the time, and we were already thinking about covering it since it introduced a unique Moriarty, and that's exactly what we did. As far as con panels go, I have to recommend episode 30, From Baker Street to the Holodeck 2. We were talking about Star Trek and the connections between Star Trek and Sherlock Holmes, and we had a terrific lineup of co-panelists. Ashley, as mentioned previously, Heather Holloway, now former director of 221 Beacon, and Lee Shackelford, who was actually part of the writer's room for Star Trek The Next Generation and got Moriarty back on the show in Ship in a Bottle. Lee went into how that all came about and how the episode developed into what we see on screen, and also a little bit about what it was like in the writer's room. In terms of recap episodes, I'm going to go with episode 23, Moriarty in the Heartland, which was our recap of the 2023 Holmes in the Heartland Archenemies Conference in St. Louis. We've never had a recap more relevant to the podcast since Moriarty was covered in 2 separate presentations, along with a Moran-focused presentation. Heather Hinson, one of the conference organizers, joined us to talk about the weekend, and I also managed to get mini interviews with Ray Betzner, Beth Gallego, and Kristen Mertz, the speakers for the aforementioned presentations. There may also be a little bit of accidentally recorded audio from a particular trivia competition. If you know, you know. Of course, the amusing irony is that in the end, Heather hedges on whether Holmes in the Heartland will happen again. And indeed it will next summer. And you better believe that's gonna get a recap. Look, the thing is, my show is not a top quality production. I actually write scripts for these segments so that I can give you the best experience possible. Dynamics is not scripted. It's very raw sometimes. I'm bone tired so often that it's a running gag, but I love doing it. I think that we bring something unique and fun to this fandom of ours. And when you have a podcast host who is herself an obsessive podcast listener, you get a show that is constantly in conversation with other shows. Sometimes it's with the Baker Street Babes by way of callbacks. Sometimes it's with the Watsonian Weekly. Most commonly, it actually is with I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, and sometimes with Trifles as well. When you know that Scott and Bert have talked about something, it's an easy reference point. We've just done 2 amazing episodes about 221 Beacon. First with outgoing directors Crystal Nolan, Heather Holloway, and just now with Johanna Draper Carlson and Heather Hinson. So we're doing our best to stay on top of news that affects us. Plus, we have some fun stuff coming up. So, I know I never say this, but this is my baby. Please give us a try. And that's it. I've spent too long trying to win you over already, and I actually need to be planning our next couple of episodes because maybe we'll finally nail this scheduling thing yet. Catch you later.
Well, I mean, we got the baby and the bathwater.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It was so great.
Oh, I'm so happy to know about that. I didn't realize that Madeline had actually talked to Daniel Davis about Moriarty. That's grand.
Yeah,
and to Lee about, the writer's room and so on. That sounds fabulous.
Yeah, it's delightful. And clearly there's a passion there. And that's what makes all the difference in any good podcast. Because speaking of unscripted shows, I think, and we've heard this from listeners as well, part of the magic of what happens here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is the rapport that you and I have with each other. We clearly don't script things out, and it shows sometimes, but we have fun while we're doing it. And it's all in the personality of the hosts and the content that we or they, in the case of Madeline and her co-host Dixie, decide to give us. So it's charming.
Yeah, and it's also what we find. I'm hoping to get a personality for Christmas this year.
I'll tell you what. I'm not going to wrap it, so it'll be easier for you.
Oh, that's the same unwrapped personality I've always had. I can tell a used personality a mile off. First of all, there's no gift receipt. Now what am I doing?
And it's wrinkled, too. I mean, you got to better iron yours.
Don't get me started.
Oh, you know what those jaunty strings mean? That's right, it's time for a canonical couplet, the Sherlock Holmes quiz program, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to put on your own deerstalker, pull out your own magnifying glass. Well, we won't go so far as to ask you to puff on a pipe, but we will ask you to solve for it. And the last time we were around here, the clue sounded something like this. When a missing gem sparked consternation, Holmes chose a sly impersonation. Okay, Bert, I'm going to hand it to you now. Which Sherlock Holmes story are we talking about?
Easy. That begins, at Watson's house with Mary. That's the case where Mrs. Neville St. Clair complains to Mary Watson that her laundry delivery service is sending her wrinkled undergarments.
Boy.
That's the case Watson called The Van with the Twisted Slip.
Oh, I don't even know why I show up some weeks. Yeah. A valiant attempt, but not correct. I know. We're all shocked. Here. But our friend Eric Deckers once again comes to the rescue. He writes, Ausgezeichnet. I've solved it. Gesundheit, Eric. It's the story of a romance novelist whose sister is abducted, and the ransom is a treasure map to a valuable jewel. Holmes poses as a notorious but lovable smuggler who rescues the novelist and her sister and recovers the missing gem. It's the story Watson called Romazaran the Stone. Except I think I messed that one up because Holmes looks nothing like Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito makes a terrible Watson. I'm thinking of the 1984 classic Romancing the Stone, but the correct answer is The Adventure of the Mazarin Stone. Yes, that is right, Eric. In a roundabout way, once again, you've done it. Oh, and I should mention, I've got a copy of it right over here. Our friend Eric Deckers has a new book out called Wither Utopia. 20 years after nearly all the conservatives in the world died, the liberals have their ideal utopia, and they're screwing it up. If you're a fan of political satire and bureaucratic boobery, or ever wondered how a utopian future could ever go wrong, this book is for you. If you loved Catch-22, The Woody, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or The Short Reign of Pippin IV, then you'll love Wither Utopia. It's available from fourhorsemenpublications.com. Little plug for our friend Eric, who does so much of this tireless and thankless work every week, combating the witticisms of Bert. So, with that out of the way, yes, the answer is the Mazarin Stone. And we did have a handful of people who guessed that properly. There were a few people who guessed the Beryl Coronet, believe it or not. But the majority of people did guess correctly as the Mazarin Stone. So let's pull out the prize wheel and give it a big spin. Goes around and slowing down on number 19. And that looks like it is Dan Petty. Dan, congratulations to you. He submitted his answer. He said, my track record hasn't been very good lately. I find myself looking too deeply and missing something. My initial guess is the Mazarin Stone, and my final answer. Well, that worked out for you, Dan, so congratulations on that. We will have something from the vault for you. And this time around, because it is our interview with Nick Meyer, we're going to have a copy of Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing for the winner of this canonical couplet. Here we go. Gregson and Lestrade made contributions minimal. Within 3 days, Holmes's hand was on the criminal. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If we choose your name at random from all the correct submissions, you'll win. Good luck. Okay, Bert. I don't know how we did it.
Yay!
I don't know how. Oh, did you have the record button on?
No.
Oh.
Isn't this the rehearsal?
We're going to be doing that for quite a while, I think. Oh, well, we have another episode coming up for you in the middle of September, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Check out the Sherlockian calendar to see how you can get involved all around the country or around the world if people submit dates for other events from non-North American places. And, of course, we encourage you to share the show. Whatever platform you happen to be listening to us on, just hit that share button and let other people know that there are Sherlockian podcasts available, particularly I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Well, what have you got to say for yourself, Bert?
Not guilty. And I waive consecutive translation.
Well, vox populi, vox dei.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's easy. That's easy for you to vox.
Stay tuned in our next episode for the unvoxing. And the unboxing. Well, this is the always boxed about Scott Monty.
And I'm the poorly labeled Bert Wolder.
Together, we say the games. Foot.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck.
And believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.